Hey, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So excited to have you. This space is so new, and there is so much speculation and so much stuff that's happening behind the scenes. And you having, behind, I think being in the valley, being a VC, you would have so much information that people would love to hear. So I want to start off with first, like, kind of knowing more about you, so that people can know, more about you, what have you done in the past, and what made you get to BitClout.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe I'll do a quick introduction. Hey, everybody, my name's Chris McCann. I'm one of the general partners of Raise Capital. We're a venture fund based here in the Valley. We invest all across mostly infrastructure. So enterprise infrastructure, open source, financial infrastructure, where a lot of the crypto and sort of digital assets resides in, at least in my head. Before this, I spent the last 5 years at Greylock Partners. I mostly focus on a lot of the emerging market sectors we're looking at, and I help build and run all of our community related efforts. So yeah, I guess like my the way I found out about BitClout sort of ties into like the way I originally found out about crypto. Sort of post Greylock, pre race, I did a lot of personal investments in this space. So I was one of the earliest users and investors in Binance when they originally launched. I was the very first investor for Solana when the project was just getting started. Our fund was one of the first investors for FTX before the exchange got released. And so I've been in the space for a long time. I've seen a lot of the sort of ecosystem come to fruition, and I've seen a lot of the things being built. And so I had a few friends ping me, and they're like, "Hey, have you heard about this BitClout thing?" And this was before the public release, before it was being built. Like the team was kind of just being formed at the time. And at the time, there was basically no public information about this thing. So I was like, I've never heard about this thing. And then I had another friend ping me, Andy Arts, who's big on the platform now. And he's like, "Hey, have you heard about this BitClout thing?" And I was like, "No, but you need to tell me more about it because
Right.
everybody keeps asking me about it." And so I was part of the early kind of beta users before like the official release of the site itself. Originally, it was kind of, I was just an early, user. It was more of an early experimental thing for me. I'm sure we'll go kind of much more into kind of BitCloud in the future and all that. But that's, I guess, how I originally found out about it in the first place, and sort of my involvement with it as a user, sort of early on.
Makes sense. So it's the other, friends and other people in the valley talking about it, and then that made you wanted to check it out as a VC. You're obviously naturally curious, and you want to know what's happening and stuff like that.
Yeah, I tend to kind of be an early adopter for a lot of products anyway. Anything that's
Yeah.
coming out new, I want to try. And yeah, BitCloud is one of those weird things where it's a social product in the crypto world, which is more of a rarity. I guess
Yep.
most of the things in the space tend to either be DeFi or financial or exchange related. And this is one of the rare social things. So I was like, yeah, I wanted to try it out. But again, more from like just a pure user perspective.
Makes sense. So, what are your thoughts on, like, why is decentralized social like a game changer? Why do you think that?
Well, I guess there's the obvious answer. Like right now, our digital social lives are basically intermediated by a handful of companies, whether that's Facebook or Google or Twitter or etc. Is basically all of our social lives, and in effect, all of our data resides in a handful of platforms, which are not the most transparent things in the world. They're not the most developer friendly things in the world, and it gives very little control for you as the user to use any of this stuff. And so the original dream for a lot of this is if your account is bounded by public-private key pairs that you control, it's in effect yours. Like you actually control kind of the outcome of it. And if these things are built on a protocol or on a blockchain, they are effectively much more open by nature. And so developers will be able to build stuff on top of it without the hindrance of a central company or central party in this.
Makes sense.
There's also more of I guess, a deeper kind of speech element to it. Right now, because we entrust these large companies with all of our digital lives, we also entrust them with all the moderation aspects of this, which I think it's really easy to blame all the big companies for this,
Yeah.
but it also puts them in like a really awkward position. Like Facebook needs to govern free speech worldwide in every country, in every jurisdiction, every single local election, every single controversy. Man, like that must be really tough
So
as a
hard.
centralized platform to be able to govern all this. It's no company or country has probably ever had to deal with this in their lifetime on the planet, for lack of a better phrase. And so,
Y-
hopefully, again, the positive kind of dream aspect of it is, again, if you leave this to a more decentralized network, people can create their own versions, their own subsets, their own. I'll draw the Reddit analogy, like their own subreddit that could maybe have like their own rules, their own sort of descriptions, their own sort of openness attached to it, and it doesn't need to be governed by a central party. You could have it in a distributed form and fashion. Again, there's positive, negatives. Like with all things, there's all trade-offs for a lot of these things. I won't just say like, it's net positive and like the whole world should do it, but it's a different conception than like what we have today.
You know what's crazy? It's interesting. I've been watching a lot of videos and reading about the future, and the one thing that comes up with the whole governance thing. And this one guy, I watched this video on YouTube. Is a guy named Jake Tron, and he made a video on the future of water cities. And example he was giving was, he said that basically, if you think about it, there's only enough countries in the world. There hasn't been enough test run as startups on
Hmm.
governance to find out, like, think about governance as a startup, right? To find out like what is a good way to govern any country, right? And so and then I heard that, I'm like, yeah, it's gonna make sense. He's like, and he gave an example. If you have a water city example, you can run your own test and find out which is the best one, and people can join and so on, right? And then actually a couple of days ago, I was listening to the guy who bought Beeple, Metakovan, who
Mm-mm.
bought the art, and in his interview, he said that if you think about it, Facebook or Twitter or any social media big giant is actually a government. It's like basically they have their own country in a way. They have like a billion users, which are the members of that country. They dictate the rules, and I kind of feel kind of like what you were saying in this decentralized world, same thing where I feel like we haven't run enough tests yet, as like we haven't thought of it as a startup, so we don't know what's a good way to govern, right? We just going with what's like whatever someone chooses, right? And sure,
Yeah.
there's a lot of challenges, I guess, but
Yeah, even again, like giving the big platforms today like the benefit of the doubt. I was listening to this podcast, and a lot of people might not know this, but Facebook internally has they basically call it like the Facebook Supreme Court. They actually
okay.
have a court that they built internally to Facebook, which is manned actually not by Facebook employees. It's actually manned by people outside. They have some people who are government leaders, some people are NGO people, some people are business people. I don't know exactly sort of how it's picked and all the mechanics of it, but yeah, the podcast is talking about it, and they take some of the more controversial issues, which don't are either just controversial for their nature, or they sort of don't really fit into like the guidelines or whatever. So again, I think it's really to put all the blame on our current sort of large
Yeah.
tech companies and say it's your fault, you're evil, you're doing all this stuff. But again, I can't think of any company or country that's had to deal with this. Like you were just saying,
Yeah.
like Facebook has a population of 1 billion people. Like outside of
Yeah.
China, India, and not even the U.S. is at that scale. Like who has had to manage stuff like this? And it's in
Yeah.
fact it's
Yeah.
more than 1 billion people because it's worldwide by nature. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean these are really, really, really tough problems, and again the decentralized approach is just it's a different conception of it. It's instead of trying to solve all these things logically centrally, why don't we just give the power basically to the people and to the developers and to the governance holders, whatever that may be, and let them figure it out. Whether that's better or not is kind of up to the builders to figure
Or
that out.
yeah.
But again,
Yeah.
it's a different conception, different promise.
It makes things exciting for sure. Uh, what do you think about BitClout as a blockchain, though?
It's an interesting question, and I'm not sure if you framed it this way on purpose or not. But one of the initial questions when people were joining is BitClout a blockchain? There is actually a lot of skepticism, like what's actually underpinning these things? How does consensus work? Like how are transactions being done? There's a lot of people a lot smarter than me who have looked into it. Notably, there's a few people on the site called Ludo, Zam, H. Paulson, who have spin up nodes and does all stuff. And from at least the intel I can gather from respectable people in the space, BitClout is an actual blockchain that actually has transactions and accounts. It's actually structured slightly more as a closer in analogy to Bitcoin's blockchain as opposed to Ethereum's. Like there's no sort of concept
Smart
of like
contracts
smart
or
contracts built into it or whatever. It's a strict account-based system. Where a lot of people's skepticism lie are sort of twofold, which are a little unfortunate, but I think will, or maybe threefold. One was already fixed. One was it was impossible to run a node in the system. This has been fixed. The BitClout team came out with sort of node support, so you actually can spin up your node now. But that was a big criticism. The second one is even though the fact that they put out the nodes out there, it's actually not open source. So you can't really see all the details underneath, and even the explorers, they're not giving you the full hex transactions. You're only seeing the basically more defined details that they're giving you, whoever like the team may be. And so hopefully this will be fixed. They've said they're going to open source the whole thing, but that's what one other layer of skepticism. The other one is the mechanism for consensus is slightly unclear at this point. Exactly who can approve transactions, how are transactions rolled up into it, where do transaction fees go, and then how do forks or upgrades work into the system. Because right now there has been protocol changes, like the additions of being able to move creator coins, which have been implemented, but the consensus process for doing so is super unclear.
got it.
Again, all this will happen in due time, but
Yeah,
unlike a lot of other crypto projects that are completely public from day one and you can sort of see and not trust but verify, BitClout has taken a different approach, which some people in the crypto space are okay with, and some people vehemently disagree with it.
makes sense. Um, when you look at, so obviously, I think I heard you say this before, and I completely get it. When we see BitClout, as general users, we see it as the front end, right? We don't see the back end or what's the technology, what's so like, I'm sure it's not the Twitter that excites VCs or in general, like, right? It's what can be built on top of that, right? From your experience of like talking to so many smart people, being in the space doing your due diligence, what kind of like, it's all hypothetical, obviously, but what kind of things you can see being built on top of it?
That's a good question. There's, I guess, two ways to answer that. Maybe one giving like some larger context to start with. So, yes, to your point, BitClout, the product, is not necessarily the front end that we interact with today. I think most people just
Right.
see the really simple, basic thing, where it's like you can buy and sell people, and like that's cool, but like, what can you do with it? It's actually everything that underpins it. So you can build your own interface with it. You can build a trading interface with it. You can build your own version of a social network. You can build a whole Reddit. Literally, you can do whatever you want. In that sense, it's more similar to like Ethereum, I guess. Like Ethereum, you can send Ether back and forth, but that's not really what Ethereum is.
Yep.
Like Ethereum is all this other stuff you can do with it, which is going to be intermediated by the developers who are actually going to build stuff. And so that's why I, in particular, I've been so well, two answers to that. Like I have been so supportive and excited about the builders and creators doing stuff on top of this.
Yep.
Because I think in the beginning when BitClout opened up, a lot of people were, I don't know, finding the next celebrity, the next DJ, the next person that was going to verify, and there was a lot of sort of speculation on those kind of people. Maybe because like I'm just really bad at like celebrities and DJs and artists, and like I'm not like super into sports.
I don't think that is the case. I think it's more like you said, like I think until there are tools, celebrities can't really do anything with it. Sure, they
Well,
might come on it, and what did they do? They leave.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna say like so like when I first came on, like everybody was sort of speculating on all these people. The first two things I did was one, I went to the Genesis block and I tried to figure out all of the keys that were behind it. And then the second thing is I tried to find all the developers that were behind projects around this. Again, like the most geekiest things you could possibly think of. Everybody's looking at celebrities.
I love that.
I'm in the Genesis block, like looking at all the keys. And so one of the things I'm known for on the side is I compiled a spreadsheet of all of the really early projects and the developers who are
Yep.
building stuff on the ecosystem. So you can look at what's being built today and infer like what might happen in the future. So if you look at some of the categories, some of them are like more obvious. So there's a lot of things around sort of data, research, trading, analytics, index funds. sort of publishing tools, mobile apps, analytics around around like your portfolio and P&L type stuff. So which I kind of categorize all under the trading bucket, if you will. And then there's the second subset you see, which are more of the creator tools. So they can be like pay gated sites, places where you can offer do sort of offer like exclusive things to like your coin holders, sort of video sites or content related sites, kind of wrapping the token around this sort of thing. There's sort of this whole world of creator tools, if you will. So if you use these two
Yep.
things, you can sort of have you can kind of infer like what might be coming next. Right now, everything is very BitClout centric. So all the
Yep.
content and creators, like it's all memes, it's all stuff like internal to the BitClout community itself. I think the next bigger wave we're going to see is the attempt to blend real world clout, if you will, with BitClout. And how do you imbue actual usage and value on the token that's not purely speculative? So, why
Yep.
should you actually buy and hold my token? Like, what is the value of it? Right now, it's basically just I make a lot of posts or I buy a lot of myself or we speculate on me, but like this needs to be more bounded to actual value in some extent. You get exclusive content because you hold my token. We get to do private interviews or one-on-one type stuff because you hold my token. There's a pro version of what I'm doing because you're a token holder. You also get into more of like the product related stuff, which is kind of cool. Is like, shouldn't you be able to subscribe or buy a product through either holding a token or paying with BitClout itself? Again, it is a monetary instrument, so you should be able to use it to imbue value into the thing itself. This is where I think like again, like we're not quite there yet. It's mostly just like people kind of hacking around and playing with things. But like my real sort of big bet on this is the builders and makers of the ecosystem who are building all these tools and things. This is eventually where all the value is going to be seen itself. And it's going to have to be bounded
Makes
by
sense.
not just pure unbridled speculation, but you're going to have to bound these things by some sort of value internal to the system itself.
Makes sense. Um, Sorry, I wanted to pick one point you said. You said when you went and you looked at the Genesis block and you saw all the transactions. What do you mean by that? Like, what was happening? What did you see?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So this is yeah, it's a whole other separate rabbit hole that I did, and that this was mainly what I did kind of at the first week of launch. So what's cool is because this is a blockchain, you can go back to the original Genesis block, block 00000, and you can see uh, who or the what entities were part of like the original Genesis creation of this. So when you look into it, there's 482 keys within the Genesis block. Some of these are known accounts, like for example, Chamath and the Winklevoss brothers and Andy, Ryan Hoover, and sort of the more obvious people were part of the Genesis block itself.
Sorry, cutting you off. Do you mean that they were using it? Do you mean that they came in and they bought their tokens, or what do you mean by you see them
No,
as a part of Genesis?
so the Genesis block, very similar to like the BitClout Genesis block. It's the very, very first block that's created that kicks off the whole system. So before the Genesis block, there is no keys, there's no accounts, there's no BitClout, there's nothing exists. It's like the Big Bang. Nothing exists before the
Right.
Genesis block. Everything exists afterwards. So the set of 482 keys in the original block, these are part of the block that created BitClout. Um,
Right.
so
Got it.
so there were no users beforehand. These 482 keys were effectively the first users of the site, and it all happened
Got it.
at the exact same time during the Genesis block creation.
So even if they created, let's say, as a random example, let's say they created 200 or 300 people, like who they believe are the biggest one or will be involved or whatever, at least the other 100 ones, for example, here are associated with the project basically.
Yeah, none of the
As
so like the all the original reserved accounts or whatever were not included in Genesis block. That happened afterwards. So
okay.
this is really it's the creation of it. It's the kickoff of everything. And again, it's only
Got it.
482 keys, and of that, only I'd have to look really quick, but I want to say like somewhere on the order of 80, 76 are actually known named accounts. So some of them are the obvious people ones where it's easy to know, or like they verified it or they said it. Some of the other ones are a little bit more curious. So I knew about David, the DA5 ID, and who I am because these two were part of the original Genesis Block accounts, which started the whole thing. And by the way, these two accounts with David DA5 ID, these are actually two of the most important Genesis Block accounts in the whole thing. And so it was easy to, by looking at the Genesis block, it's easy to infer that these keys have a special value associated with it just by in terms of holding and value and their position inside the Genesis block account. Of course, like I will leave the speculation up to the community to decide who they think it might be. Like I don't want to put I don't want to put like my
Sure.
own assumptions out there. But again, just by looking at the internal data of the Genesis block account, you can see all this stuff. So there's both the named accounts, there's the pseudo anonymous or pseudo anonymous sort of accounts in there, and then there's a handful of completely anonymous accounts or accounts that have not claimed any username at all. That some of these actually hold substantial creator token and BitClout holdings. And by the way, if you look at this whole block in totality, these 482 keys hold the vast majority of all the BitClout that has been created. And by the way, they hold the vast amount of creator tokens in terms of value that have been created as well. Again, some people, um, uh, BitClout gets a lot of criticism for this. Like some people would say this is unfair, like you didn't open this up, or it's only these 482 hand-selected individuals that get to perceive sort of all the value in this. But again, this is how the Genesis block is constructed. Like I put no value judgment on how they did it, but the cool thing is like you could actually go back and see it all, and you can still see it today.
Interesting. How do you see the Genesis block?
If you just go to the block explorer and just put its block basically 0, so just do like I forgot the exact numerator, but it's like 0000. I think it's like 8 or 9 zeros, and if you put
Okay.
that, it'll show you basically the first block.
Got it. Cool. Wow, this is interesting. That I like how you always thought about it too. You just went right to the source, and you're like, let's just see what's going on behind the
Yeah,
scenes.
that's why I said like again because like I'm bad at celebrities and sports and all that. Like I went to the Genesis block. Everybody else, they were like, oh, who's gonna verify and whatever. And again, I tried to do some of that. It's just not. It's like not what interests me all that much. So again, I did the super geeky thing of like I looked at the Genesis block.
That's amazing. So obviously you're keeping a very close eye in the space. You're interacting. You're seeing what projects are going on. You're advising BitCloud Hunt. What are you? Have you started making investments in the space, or how are you looking at it? Are you looking for that, or how should a founder go about like building a product when you're trying to raise investment? What should they be? How should they be looking at it?
It's also an interesting question, which I'm not sure if you phrase it this way, but on purpose. But these projects on BitCloud, are any of them raising, starting, whatever? Are we looking at them? Yes, although the question always comes between are they doing this in the creator token format? Or when you say are they starting, like are these actual legitimate outside externally funded companies?
I meant VC funding. Yeah.
Yeah, but by and large, almost all of the BitClout projects are all still very internal. They just create a
Right.
profile, they have some tokens, people buy them, they figure out some use for those tokens, and they sort of try to recycle them and increase the value of them through usage in some imbuing way. In terms
Right.
of uh, independently funded VC companies built on top of BitClout, there's really only one,
Yeah.
maybe
I
two.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Uh,
They're
yeah,
yeah.
I won't say
Yeah.
who because again,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
again, that's like slightly more confidential. No one out them, but like
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of the number of proportion, there's much fewer uh, companies that are going for scale built on top of this yet. Which this is it's actually a much more interesting question is are the projects that are going to be built on top of BitCloud, are they going to be denominated in BitCloud or are they going to be denominated in dollars? Yeah. Again, most of them are not at a scale yet to even make that distinction yet. But the ones that
Yeah.
get to enough escape velocity, that's a super interesting question because then it ties all into even like the most basic one of like, how do you fund ongoing operations for this? Typically, you would just like raise money as a company and you would pay employees or whatever. If you only had creator token holdings, like what do you do with that? Do you do like a planned sale of like a portion of these and you OTC and that's what you use, or do you have all your employees going to buy into it and it's like the increase in value that you're going for? It creates a whole bunch of like weird questions and dynamics which are interesting to like think about. But again, keep in mind if these things are going to roll up into actual companies that are going to operate at scale with real teams and stuff, these are actually like considerations that the project creators and founders and people in the ecosystem actually need to think about, well, which again far
I
less of
mean,
this is actually thought through so far.
makes sense. I mean, because right now, let's say example, you have a company and you want to hire people, you want to pay them salaries or whatever to build the team faster. Like as soon as you sell your own coin, it shows that you don't, you might come across as like you're not, you might be like, in either scamming or like you might not be invested in your own project. The trust kind of gets lost. And but again, you for building the company, you need to pay people to hire more people and build it, right? So
Yeah,
so and
I get a
yeah,
lot of these questions from founders themselves, and my response is usually always the same.
yeah,
Anything you want to do is fine as long as you're very
transparent,
transparent and
transparent
open
about
about it. Because
it. Makes
again,
sense.
keep in mind, all this is built on a blockchain, and projects and people have built tools to track all this stuff now. And
Right.
so people get signals like if a project starts selling themselves, like they like people know this, like you can't hide from this. And so
Right.
again, like if you're doing it for legitimate reasons to fund operation and it's a planned sale that you put out there that you told people about, like that's cool. Like I think most people will understand where you're coming from. If all of a sudden one day you just sell all of the project's coins and don't tell anybody and disappear, like that's totally not cool.
Yeah.
Again, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, I think any approach is fine. You just need to be. It's like any other thing. Like building trust is very difficult to do and takes a long time. But any one action you do that's seen as untrustworthy by the community, like that will basically ruin your reputation forever. Trust is just one of those things where
Makes
it's
sense.
hard to build. It's very easy to lose.
Makes sense. I want to talk about BitClout Pulse because one of the first tools built on the platform, and I remember you saying in one of the podcasts you did that they were early to understand that they were building for BitClout as a protocol, then BitClout
Yeah.
as like for example like a tool, right? And so I want to know this for myself. So I am building tools like small tools here and there. How do I and my developer, like my business partner, he's like he is full stack coder, he's great, but like he doesn't look at the business side of things or creative side of things. So I am doing that, but I don't understand that as a protocol yet on how to like what kind of tools can be built on top of that, right? So how can I go and learn more about that side of things?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. Contextually. Yeah. So like when BitCloud first launched, almost very quickly. I don't remember if it is the exact same day or not, but like BitClout Pulse was already out there. And again, just keep in mind at the time, like the Explorer was not very good. Like it was hard to pull data from this, especially at scale. Like there was no APIs. There was no way to like track any of this stuff. And the BitCloud Pulse team had built a whole bunch of internal tools to be able to do that. And then they even went further than that. Like I remember I was like they released it now, but like I was an early beta tester for their wallet analyzer product. So they would be able to take any key and then find all the wallet holdings. Which again, all this was possible to do, just but because like you're not giving uh, the full transaction account, it's very hard to construct. And then also, if anybody's played around with the BitCloud Explorer, it's not the cleanest thing in the world. It's messy, and then it's hard to aggregate. Like you need to like you really need to understand it to like do it well. And man, like the BitCloud Pulse team was understood this super well and was already doing it like almost on day one immediately. Um, I like I was doing all this research into the Genesis block. I was a little bit later into doing all the research on the products, much earlier than a lot of people, but far later than the BitCloud Pulse team. Like I don't even me like I don't know if I fully appreciated what actually could be built around the ecosystem. They were like the really the first pioneer in this, if you will.
Yeah.
And only afterwards, like, have you seen other people kind of come to this realization. Even like the reason why I put together the project spreadsheet was at the time I had the question in my head, like, okay, BitClout Pulse is really cool. How
Yeah.
many other people are actually trying to do anything like this? And at the time, there was only a handful, like one, two, three, maybe at most. It's only been within the last few weeks or so that you've seen kind of a explosion of people actually trying to build stuff around like the ecosystem itself. So to your point, like we are still ridiculously early, even
Oh,
now today. Like
fair.
it is so early. Like none of this has been won. Nobody's figured out any of this stuff. Like this is super new. There's a ton of opportunity looking forward. I guess like this. How do you how do you how do, I guess that the question is like how do you view this as a protocol, not like a product, and like how do you
Yeah.
think about the things around this? I guess again like the easiest best analogy I can come up with is like look at Ethereum itself and almost just treat BitClout and what you see as the front end as like the simple version of it. And it's
Mm.
basically it's just the being able to buy BitClout, being able to send BitClout, and now being able to send creator tokens, which is a kind of a cool recent thing they added. Um, Everything else around that and everything you can do for that is basically up for grabs. Like what's a good example? There's a team I won't name who's building automation tools around this. And so, could you actually automate based on certain signals or things or data pulled inside triggers of either events or sends or sells or buys or couldn't you basically create like a trading bots like around this thing? Again, it's a super simple conception of it. It's kind of close to like what we know and all that, but you could build a whole company and a whole product, a whole kind of experience around like literally like just that alone. And that's like one of the more obvious, closer things like tied to it. Just try to extend that like as far as like you can think through, and like
Yeah.
you can do like weird stuff like in theory like why shouldn't you be able to take a creator token and collateralize it just like you would an NFT or a DeFi asset. Why aren't you allowed to do staking on top of this? Why aren't
Yeah.
you allowed to do? I mean, in theory, you can do like sort of yield type related things to this. Just treat these again. These are just assets with values attached to them. So like, why can't you use them into other products as well? Again, from this perspective, it is ridiculously early. Like I've
Yeah.
seen
Makes sense.
very few people or projects around this, but like all this is potentially possible. Again, I think from this point that the BitClout team would actually have to open source everything. This would have to be listed on exchanges. Like people would need to actually audit everything internally and see it to like really trust it. But
Yep.
if we can get up until that point, man, there's a bunch of really cool stuff you could build with this.
Yeah, makes sense. Talking about like projects and people, what are some of the projects and people that are, okay, obviously this is not financial advice. Don't invest because of this. But what are some of the projects and people that are really standing out to you?
Yeah, let me look. So I took the BitClout project list when I originally put it together. I was initially just doing some of the curatorial work myself. People would send me things, I would look at them if it seemed cool, and I can kind of do some basic verification on who was building it. I'd include it, and very quickly it got to a point where people were just sending me so much stuff that like I couldn't keep up with it. On the other hand, you did kind of have the slightly more unfortunate thing is I think because people figured out that people were valuing these projects highly. Been a lot more of these fake projects or sham projects or just straight up like scam projects that you have to be more aware of. And so it's starting to get to a point where like I literally like just couldn't keep up with this, and I was also being much more careful about what I included on the list or not. And so
Makes
that's
sense.
actually how I found the BitClout Hunt guys. As I was like, man, there really should be like product hunt for BitClout. I was like, I wonder if
Yeah.
anybody thought of that. And then
Yeah.
initially, I just went to the URL. So I did bitclouthunt.com, and I noticed it was taken. And I was like, like somebody else has been thinking about this. I wonder who's doing it. And then on the bottom of the footer, it said like made by like JCKLY,
Oh,
Jackwood. And then I was
Lally,
like,
yeah.
I should see who this guy is. And so I literally just sent him a message out of the blue, and I'm like, hey, are you building a BitClout hunt? And he's like, how did you know about this? I literally just went to the URL. He's like, I have not told anybody about this. And I was
Yeah.
like, this is really cool. And so I helped them out. It's a project that's cool because again, I basically I deprecated the spreadsheet I put together, and and I'm basically moving everything over to them for two reasons. One, they built a real product. It's not like a spreadsheet, so it looks a lot better. And two, they don't promise verification, but like they do much more verification than I as an individual would ever be. And this is like
Yeah.
one of the best places to discover actual new projects that are being created by more legitimate sources.
Yeah.
Outside of that, there's also I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and I think you did an interview with a Sigil of BitSwap. They
Yep.
want to solve right now. Another big problem is you can't basically exit BitClout. Like once you're in BitClout, you're kind of stuck there. You can't trade it for anything else. And so there's been all entrepreneurs popping around to try to build exchanges to solve this. I think BitSwap recently went public, so you could actually execute real trades on top of the product, which is super cool. There's also a slightly different one. There's another project called Moonbounce, which
Yep.
is trying to do this blend between creator tools in real world cloud tied to the BitClout holdings to solve the question, as you were mentioning, of how do you, for a artist or a DJ or whatever, how do you actually give your token value outside of just the pure speculative one? So this is trying
Yep.
to imbue actual usage and things around that. And then maybe one more, just to, or maybe two more to say. One is a BitClout Signal. So they do Jens and his team. They build a whole bunch of Telegram bots and alerts and notifications. They just released a thing called Track, which lets you track some of your specific holdings to see if there's anything movement or anything around that. And last but not least, a more of a fun one. There was a project called Clout Punk, which if you're familiar with the punks in Ethereum, it's
Punk.
these like little
Yep.
256K generative things. Clout
Yep.
Punk, if you bought some of their creator tokens, they would make you a little
They would
kind of
punk.
punk
Yeah.
in your
You know.
face, and then they were going to take all of them and then like sell them as like an NFT asset or whatever.
Yeah.
Literally, like my profile, I use the Clout Punk that they created for me. So even if it's just that, like that's pretty cool. But like
Yeah.
I also think like it doesn't have to be all these projects also don't need to be like super serious either. Like it's cool to see things that are more art related things, creator oriented things. Like there's been a lot of music related things. And again, like, I'm more interested in the technology portion of it, but this
Yeah.
can be used for anything, which is kind of cool to see.
It's amazing. By the way, I had Jack from Big Cloud Hunt and Paul from Moonbounce in the last couple of episodes, and they both spoke very, very highly of you. Just letting you know.
Thank you guys.
um, so, anything? What do you think is the next way? Like, as if you were to say, like, let's say a magic wand or whatever. Like, what do you? Obviously, you know that what Moonbounce is building, and you know what BitSwap is building, and all that. But like, let's say if there was next thing that you would want to see built, what would that be?
Next thing I'd want to see built. Ooh, I have a really good one, but there's a few people doing this, and I don't necessarily want to out them. Maybe I'll do the second one that I'd love to see, which there are
Fair.
actually a couple people doing this, but not to scale and fruition. Is one that there's been a handful of attempts to try to create indexes out of specific tokens.
Yep.
Like there's been the like a friend of mine, like he built the Builder TF. So Miyazaki is his BitClout name. So similar to like how I'm trying to support all the builders and makers in this ecosystem, he actually constructed a little index that does the same thing. So
Makes sense.
you
Yeah.
invest in the index, and they go out and do all the work of finding the builder and makers to
Oh,
support. So you don't have to do
I
the
love
work of
that.
doing so. Such a more efficient
Uh,
mechanism. There's
I
another
love
one
that.
called Whale TF, which is doing the same thing, although looking at the people who have the largest BitClout holdings. Another friend of mine, he did like the BitClout Boys Index. So basically tracking the band members and kind of their ups and downs and all the drama between them. But it'd be cool to see this not as a one-off thing, but actually for a system for constructing indexes. So like,
Makes
why
sense.
shouldn't I'm really bad at picking like the celebrities or whatever, but somebody's probably super good at it. I would love to just
Yep.
follow like, hey, give me the best celebrity creator holdings, give me the best music ones, give me the best project related ones, like whatever. Pick your variable. I'm sure there's certain people who do a lot more trading who are smarter about this sort of stuff, and it'd be really cool to follow people like that. You could almost have like
Yep.
a follow all of Andy Arts's trades index. Like that in theory should
Yep.
also be a thing. Again, there's
Makes
been early attempts at this, but like it'd be really cool to see this as a fully fledged structured product that you can be out there and buy, sell, and create.
Makes sense. I was living in Waterloo about a few years ago, and there was a company. I don't remember the name, but they were doing like like a top 20 crypto. What do you call top 20 crypto coins, and like just like managing the portfolio within those coins. And as a first time investor, like as in like in the space, and I was like, I don't know which coins and how to go about it and manage that. Like, I think the easiest best bet was to do that. So, just put it in that. Don't worry about it. Move on as a as a diversification play. But now that I think about it, like that's like a very simple thing, but like moving on, like people have a lot of like interest in their own thing, right? Like you said, like if you're interested in travel, for example, and you only want to go, and that's you because you understand that, you enjoy that, you bet on that thing. It could be so cool to have those 20 travel people or companies or whatever, and have a ETF there, and then you just like generally also it also excites you because that's your interest. It's not just, what I mean, it's not just finance in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also like early on, I guess when I did the Genesis block, and then before the project stuff, like there was another weird thing I looked into where if again, this is kind of more of a bet, if BitClout really becomes a real thing that people use like in scale in the long term, the usernames themselves will actually carry a lot of value associated with it. Just think about like the
Like domains, website domains, or Instagram names. Yeah.
value of a Twitter username or value of an Instagram username. And so another thing I did, which is also a super geeky thing, but I looked at all of the most valued domain names, most valued Instagram names, most valued Twitter names, and I bought a lot of those individual profiles, very very small amounts, because in the beginning when this thing first started, all this super long tail stuff, almost all of them had a worth of $0. Like there's basically no holders of any of these things. So like you could also have a different bet of like sort of twofold. One, I want like long tail name type stuff and just give me like a collection basket. Because again, trying to manage this stuff as an individual person is like I stopped doing it. It's like a pain in the ass, basically. Another one
Yeah.
which is super interesting, although could be gamed, is like to try to be. There's a few people who try to do this, but like try to be the first buyer in every new profile that's created. Because again, when new profiles are created, they tend to have a much lower value associated with them. So there's like a person on the site called First Mover who's really good at doing this. That like, they must have like a tool or some system that they built. But like in theory, you could just actually just turn this into a structured product that you can sell. Again, these are smaller examples, but like again, if
Yeah.
there was actually a system created to actually do this, like there'd be a lot of innovation and stuff you can buy. And by the way, that'd be a lot easier of an experience for like a new person. And trying to pick, instead of trying to pick like a particular person on the top 10 or like do your own research, you just like buy the index, and maybe it's just like the top 10 index or
Yeah.
whatever, but like you can make it like much more like legible for like a normal sort of normal user.
I want to end this podcast with the last question, which is more like hopefully trying to get some sauce out of you behind the scenes with the VC stuff. Like obviously, there's a lot of high profile VCs backing this up, right? Um, and as anything, any new project that comes out, there's a lot of people like who are early adopters or like kind of like excited about it. A lot of people like are kind of haters. They don't see it, right? Um, I shouldn't use the word haters. Just not into it, But
Yeah.
I guess my question is, I'm sure the FOMO is kicking in, where you see all these big names behind it, and but at the same time, what do you see happening behind the scenes here? Like what with VCs? Like Are other people, are they seeing, all of them seeing the value, or some of them are like, no, it's just I don't see it right now. Are they jumping in because of FOMO, or they're not? Like, what's going on behind the scenes?
I'll maybe answer your question like a little bit more broadly.
Okay.
I like when I first went on the site, my initial assumption was I would have thought the early adopters would have been like the first one to use all this stuff. So think like your classical sort of tech early adopters or crypto early adopters, or like your sort of more tech skewed person. Like they would be the ones that would sign up for accounts and play things and all that. You saw a little bit of that, but it was interesting. Like you actually saw much more of the artists, the Instagram celebrities, like the more general crowd actually sign up for this. Whether or not they engage with it or use it long term is kind of a different question. But the ones that jumped on were more of the mainstream skew to it, which is really interesting because like I can't think of any other crypto project that has had normal users come to it. In fact, every crypto project in the world tries to get normal users but can't. Like it's always more of this early adopter crowds because they're such a new thing. But this one had a much more, again, for lack of a better phrase, like Los Angeles or like LA or SoCal or sort of New York skew of person come to it, which is cool. It's a very different type of user than you normally see. I think the biggest question, and again, I guess to be a little bit critical about BitClout, is you saw a lot of people kind of jumping on in the beginning. Some of the interest has kind of waned off a little bit, and then the harder one is you've seen engagement go down a lot. And so the biggest question is, okay, uh, like these high big name celebrities, they want to claim their profile so they can see their token and they see a big number. But how do you get people who actually use this thing every single day?
Yep.
Because the values of not just going to come from people claiming and leaving, but it's going to be from people who are actively participating. So again, like as with most of these products, like there's a small subset of people who are really into it and actually do use it. But the question I think will have to be, where does like the next larger group of people come from? I don't necessarily think that
Mm,
VCs are going to be that like next larger set of people. I think like experiments like Moonbounce and others are probably more likely to hit a nerve like this. So, some entrepreneur creator is going to have to figure that out. Like that's
right.
probably not going to just come naturally to BitClout on its own. Like somebody's
Got
going to
it.
have to create something that actually gets people to want to come and use it.
Wow, that makes total sense. That is amazing. That's a great way to put it. You're absolutely right, because I live with I have a bunch of friends who are like into Instagram, like influencers, and same thing. They jumped on because they wanted to, oh, like I have free money sitting here, right? Again, they didn't sell, but like they're like, oh, this is my coin, right? And but they were like, what do we do with this, right? And then they just left and like whatever, let's just move on, kind of thing, right? Uh,
Yeah,
but as long until like as you said, like until there are those tools, until there is something that they can do and actually provide value, and and hopefully and make money that way, and it becomes a way for them to like make a living, or until then it's basically, yeah, it's just until we have those tools created, there's inherent value there. Sure, there's speculation and all that stuff, but we need that engagement to, it's like a balance for a social
yeah,
media platform, I guess, at least.
yeah. And last but not least, to tie that all together is again, this is my particular bet, but I think the people who will cover all those white spaces and will figure all this stuff out won't be the BitClout protocol itself. It will have to be all the builders making products on top of this. And,
Yeah.
and, and similar to what you see in the crypto domain, that a lot of the value of BitClout, again, assuming that like this actually works at scale in the long term, will actually be borne by the ecosystem around it and not just the internal side of it. So again, that's my particular bet, but this is what I'm into. Again, maybe because I'm bad at the celebrities, so this is what I do.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. We have to do this again in 3 to 6 months and come back and see how the bets, like what happened. You know what I mean? You have to look back at it and chat about it. We're like, yes,
Yeah,
this happened or this didn't happen. But thank
cool.
you so much for being on the show, Chris. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.